Now joining me live from Nairobi as well is Kwame Owino, the CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs, just to make heads and tails of this conversation that all of us are having in terms of the relief from the Treasury. Is it good for us or not? Well, Kwame, thanks for making time for us. There's been a lot that people have talked about in the economic spheres, reducing VAT from 16% to 14%. And now the parliament is thinking that was not a very good idea. From an economic perspective, was it a good idea?
Well, I think, yes, it is, in the sense that if you have your VAT for items reduced from 16% to 14%, any tax reduction is a good relief for consumers and for producers as well. So on its own, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what Parliament was many parliamentarians were concerned with is that it's not sufficient, but obviously that's also in their own hands because VAT reduction, the minister has leeway to only reduce it by 25%, and if they think that that is not sufficient, then they can reduce it. What I think they were also not happy about is the fact that in as much as VAT has been reduced, the other goods that were not subject to VAT are now subject to VAT. So in one way, it's as if you've taken from one side and then obviously given it to the other. So that's the dilemma that I think parliamentarians are concerned with, and it's correct.
Okay, Kwame, there's some math that you put out on Twitter, which I have to admit even I was a bit challenged with. It was in terms of the pay as you earn that was reduced to 25%. Your math, and now Kenyans are also facing a pay cut for 30%. Was this a good move, and what kind of impact will that have on both the government and the people?
Let's just remember that, okay, the math is that basically if you have pay as you earn, or rather the proposal is to reduce pay as you earn obligation per month from 25% of your income, or rather from 30% of the income to 25%. Many people say that that's a reduction of 5%. But it's not true. It's a reduction of 5 percentage points, but in real terms, it's a reduction of 5 out of 30, which is closer to a 20% reduction in your total, in the total obligation that you pay. So it's basically, there's a difference between 5 percentage points and 5% reduction. Now, for the income earner, obviously that's a good relief because it allows you to keep much more of your money. It means that for every 100 shillings, instead of government taking 30% as taxes, government will take 25%, which means it'll come down from 30% obligation per month. 30 shillings for every 100, and it'll come down to 25. Now, depending on how much you earn, obviously all that stacks up. But I think it's an important point. The pressure is that, on the other hand, the national government as well needs money. And so, therefore, when it gives a tax break, such as what it does, then obviously it affects what their the revenues that government at the KRA would collect. So I think that's the tension. But it's inevitable. If government intends to give a relief, it means that relief will have to show up in lower collections by the revenue authority every month. So that's it. That's the difficult political and economic decision that needs to be made.
And when there are now lower revenue collections, and in a country that is just trying to get on its feet, what kind of impact will that have going forward, even for the people themselves?
I think the first is that government's deficit will be higher, in the sense that deficit is basically what government spends in addition, or rather, because government expenditure is more or less fixed. So what that means is that if its tax collection is going down, it means government will have to take more debt to cover up for what the expenditures that cannot be cut are. And that's the dilemma. Already government had a deficit that was 6% of GDP. In other words, government, in addition to the revenue that it collects, is borrowing more from the market and actually spending the rest of the money. So what it means is we are expanding the public debt. And that's been an issue for a long while. But I think it's because this emergency has caught government in a situation in which it did not have a lot of headroom. The borrowing was already at a very high level. The expenditure was high, and it's difficult to cut the expenditure at short notice. So when you have a shock or an emergency such as we have, the only option you have when you have reduced revenues or other tax obligations for people is actually to have to borrow more. So government is going to have to borrow a little bit more and have a wider deficit, which means the public debt is definitely going to expand.
So IMF says that the emerging markets have lost about 9 billion so far, which is more than the global recession. In your view, economically speaking, how much of an impact will this be heading forward?
Okay, if you add globally, the reason we are going into a recession is for two things. One, if you look at the COVID-19 emergency, it places governments in a bad way because you actually have to switch down the economy to prevent the virus from infecting more people and causing more deaths. So basically, saving lives is the priority. What that means, however, is that people then cannot work, and therefore incomes are affected for many, many people, and that affects government revenues on one time. It also at the same time affects farms that need to work. So for instance, airlines and all that. All these are contributors to employment and also at the same time for people. So when a recession takes place, government is in a really, really big bind in the sense that at this time, its obligations increase, but the revenues that it expects from taxpayers also reduce, both from taxpayers and obviously from. So that's the tightness that is necessary. Conventionally, what government could have done is just basically going to more debt, which is basically what they call a stimulus. But that's not possible. That's not what's possible at this moment, because at this time, you are also switching down the economy in the sense that you're asking people to stay away from work so that the virus does not spread. The main effect, as you can see, of course, oil prices have fallen, which is more or less a positive for an oil importing country such as ours. But demand for, say, services such as tourism, demand for exports that Kenya makes to other parts of the world obviously has also reduced, and the supply of other goods and services that we need for intermediate inputs are. So the world is in a bind, I think. The economy is going to slide and actually be contract for a while before the virus is defeated, or at least before the infections are controlled, and then people can go back safely to work.
Okay. From an economic standpoint, Kwame, how do we recover from this pandemic now?
I think it just depends. So speaking specifically about Kenya, obviously there's a slowdown. I think our growth rates are going to fall by quite a bit. Hopefully, we hope that it doesn't contract, but there's a possibility that actually might have negative growth, a small possibility, but it's possible. So as soon as people are able to go back to work, and if the number of infected people is not so high that it overwhelms the health system, we hope that is what happens, then it is just possible that if either a vaccine or through total controls, the infections are reduced so that people can go back to work and schools can resume, then obviously we'll build over time. But it's going to take time. It's not something that's going to happen in a month or two. It will probably be on a recovery mode for the next 3 months and possibly for 6 months. But that's a question of let's wait and see, hoping that there's no second surge in the infections.
Okay. And Kwame, as we finish, what should Kenyans expect now, henceforth? Are we going to have less money in circulation? Are we going to lose more jobs? What should people expect?
Yes, I think there's going to be regrettably some hardship. Not even expect, it's already happening, because as you can see in parts like Nairobi, where there's been not only the curfew, but at the same time, what people are calling the lockdown. But what it means is that you cannot travel into or out of Nairobi if you do not live here. I think what that means is that there are businesses. So for instance, the businesses that involve the owners traveling or doing some work outside the county. So that inter-county connection, with the exception of essential services such as food, has been brought down. So what that means is that many businesses that supply things outside the city, especially if those are not what are considered essential, transportation businesses obviously across counties are stopped. The kind of services and things that people transfer across the counties has also stopped. In Mombasa as well, there are curfews, meaning that some businesses that provide services late in the evening, hotels, restaurants, and other services are going to stop. And these employ a lot of people. At the same time, markets are closing earlier than they should, so you've shortened the workday. All these means that, yes, people are going to be in quite some tight situations, because obviously their income that relies on their day-to-day trading has been affected.
All right. Thanks, Kwame. That's Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs, speaking to us live from Nairobi here, just making heads and tails of all the directives that has been given by the government and what's in it for you henceforth. He says we should brace for tougher times ahead. However, we're still optimistic that we will get out of this. All right, we're taking a quick break here on Daybreak. When we come back, we'll be giving you the news updates at 9 a.m. Every hour, we promised, we'll be letting you know what's happening around you in regards to COVID-19. All right, so we're taking a quick break now. It's time for the kids. Watch some cartoon.